Welcome to this video on where I discuss the comparisons between Clorinde and Keqing and the pros and cons compared to each other. So is Clorinde just better Keqing? Well, let's just start off with how similar they can be. They're both 5-star electro storage DPSs with relatively high electro application. They both have very similar team archetypes and especially excel in Aggravate team comps due to their high electro application. They also build very similarly, if not the same. Only big difference on surface level is that Clorinde has inherent healing built into her kit, whereas Keqing does not. And Clorinde utilizing Bond of Life allows you to also use the 4-piece Bond of Life set if you wish. Let's talk about how the two would play and the pros and cons. Assuming you build them the exact same way, which I will test when I get Clorinde when she goes live, let's assume they'll both be using 4-piece Thundering Fury and Mist Splitter. Let's address one important note, however, for Aggravate team comps. There's a very strong trio core for Aggravate team comps that includes Kazuha, Fischl, and Nahida. This trio is insane for Aggravate team comps because Kazuha offers the most damage compared to the other animal units, and Nahida is the most offensive option compared to the other Dendro units. Fischl's just there because she has an insane amount of electric application which procs even more aggravates. I'll actually make a video later on that I'll link in the description once it's done, where I explain why Fischl is stronger than you may think. But just for a quick example, as someone who isn't as lazy as me, did an Aggravate team comparison. Here you can see that with a pretty well invested Fischl, the team damage contribution at C0 is already the highest, and at C6 it's even more crazy. But you know, now granted, if we look back at the Keqing's build, it could be better and could be much better invested. Because for example, like, you know, Lion's Roar isn't her best weapon. It's not as good as like Aqua Simulacra and Fischl, and this Keqing could definitely use some more elements of mastery. But even if she was well invested, this damage contribution would, like, Fischl would still, at least at the very minimum, like at worst, be like 25% or more, like, because of her A4 passive, it just procs so many aggravates. So you definitely should not ignore your Fischl's damage potential. I'll also leave this Reddit thread link in the description as well for anyone else who wants to look into it themselves. The main issue with this trio core is that you have no healer. If you were to sub one of these units with a healer or shielder, for the animal options, you either have Xianyun, Sayu, and Jean. I'm sorry. Jean doesn't really offer you much offensive utility, and Xianyun, yes, enables you to plunge, and most, if not all, plunges in the game don't have ICD. However, you don't have the damage percent bonus for Keqing and Fischl anymore, and so the plunges will only increase Keqing's damage and not Fischl's. I know Fischl isn't your quote-unquote main DPS, but if you look at the pie charts of Fischl's damage, I'm sorry, it's not even funny. Also, without Kazuha, you lose access to your grouping. You can't really replace Fischl with anyone else besides maybe Beidou, but then you have to worry more about energy recharge because Fischl is no longer in your team comp, and replacing Nahida with a Dendro defensive option, whether that's Yayao, Kirara, or Baiju, none of them offer as much offensive utility as much as Nahida does. Now, typically, you can replace one of your Anemo or Dendro units with the healer or shielder, and your team damage would still be good enough to clear the hardest content in the game, that being Abyss Floor 12. You would just lose some DPS. I know I kind of just run on spiel as to how this trio is so strong, and I just tell you it's okay if you don't have the exact trio and you slot it in a defensive unit. However, you actually won't have as much as a need to slot in a healer if your driver in this Aggravate team is Clorinde, because she has built-in healing into her kit, and it makes playing this core trio Aggravate team like way more easily and comfortably. I'll actually explain more reasons as for why being able to run this trio is important later on. Alright, let's talk about Keqing's flaws. In Keqing's Aggravate team rotation, after your team setup, Keqing's typical combo is like the following. It's skill 1, burst, skill 2, N1 charge attack, and then you cast your skill again, and then from there on you just spam charge attacks. This combo actually procs a lot of aggravates, I think like 8 for the total of this portion, and then you get an additional aggravate per N1 CA you do. If you're running the highest damage Keqing Aggravate team, being Keqing and the trio core I mentioned earlier, you lack a defensive unit. Running this team is already challenging, as your only way to dodge or negate damage with Keqing is by dodging, iframing, or if you use Black Sword, but let's be honest, that Black Sword healing is low-key copium. Otherwise, if you wanted to negate damage with Kazuha's skill or official C4, you could end up accidentally forcing an unideal rotation. For example, let's say you're trying to spam charge attacks with Keqing, and once you run out of stamina, your only option is to dodge or negate damage with iframing with other people's burst, or switching to Kazuha to use his skill and dodge in the air. This can cut off your rotations off, and which could lead to a damage loss. Having such a stamina heavy combo reserves less stamina for dodging and iframing, with or without the trio core. And also against most enemies except for bosses, these charge attacks push enemies away from you, and the charge attack animation pushes you backwards. So sometimes you have to dash forward to close the distance again, which consumes even more stamina. Luckily, Kazuha's A1 can help with this a bit, but the double pushback and intense stamina usage is actually just detrimental. If we were to compare how we would play Clorinde in the exact same team, after your team setup, Clorinde's typical combo would probably look like this: burst, the skill dash, and then pew 3 times and you dash like 6 times. This rotation would have less aggravate procs than Keqing, and in general, based on Clorinde's animation speeds, I don't think she'll be able to proc aggravate as often as Keqing. However, keep in mind, Clorinde's motion values are higher than Keqing's, so it will probably be around the same damage compared between the two. However, I didn't feel like doing the math, but I will test Clorinde and Keqing in a post-release analysis to see what the damage comparison is like. So please like and sub and turn on notice if you don't want to miss out on it. So already, we know that Clorinde's playstyle is not stamina demanding. You wouldn't have to run into survivability issues that Keqing would have if her team did not have a defensive unit. Additionally, if Clorinde and Keqing's damage are similar, then yeah, on surface level, Clorinde would be better, because if their damage output is the same, but Clorinde can heal herself, does not push back enemies with her attacks, and is not stamina demanding, then yeah, Clorinde would just be like Keqing, but without her flaws, if their damage were similar. However, it also depends on the team comp. For example, if you have Fischl, Clorinde can't proc aggravates as fast as Keqing can, which means Fischl also may proc less aggravates as well, as Fischl's A4 allows you to proc aggravate every 0.5 seconds, as her A4 literally has no ICD, so every 0.5 seconds you can proc aggravate with Fischl. And this A4 damage also scales off of skill damage, which is why I can do so much damage. Then again, I'm actually too lazy to do the math, so be sure to watch my post-release analysis video when it comes out. So here's some things to note to keep in mind when comparing Clorinde and Keqing. If you're running Clorinde with a healer, the incoming healing would actually be converted to Bond of Life. However, that one tick healing you receive would have to be at least like 30% of her max HP, so it would be the equivalent of gaining the same amount of Bond of Life from one of her normal attacks. Otherwise, the Bond of Life you gain that isn't that much Bond of Life value would not be enough to skip a gunshot to get the max health skill dash damage, so just keep that in mind. Clorinde can also use a Quick Bloom team comp well with Furina because of her built-in healing. Don't forget that Furina's burst also actually gives healing bonus on top of the fanfare, and Clorinde's skill would heal herself for more, granting like more fanfare stacks faster. You could also give Nikita Prototype Amber to increase your fanfare stacks faster, or you could just use Baishu instead. Because you don't have healing with Keqing, the synergy with Furina is a little less potent, but that does not inherently mean that Furina and Keqing are bad together. There are also other team comps like Hypercarry ones that include Chevres or Sarah or Bennett. However, because Clorinde and Keqing's motion values are lower, I strongly believe that their highest damage output teams will either be Quicken or Quick Bloom based teams, especially because of how they apply Electro pretty fast in comparison to other Electro carries like maybe Raiden. If I missed anything that you guys thought I missed, or you guys have any questions, you can comment them down below. I'll read and respond to as many of them as I can. I read all of you guys' comments, so please don't be afraid to ask. That'll be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please consider liking and subscribing for more content if you'd like to see more content like this.